I was driving home late one night, around 2 a.m., on a stretch of rural road. It was foggy, and I could barely see a few feet ahead of me. As I was driving, I noticed something in the middle of the road up ahead. I slowed down and saw it was a woman standing perfectly still, wearing an old-fashioned white dress. Her face was pale, almost glowing in the darkness, and she didn't move a muscle. I rolled down my window and asked if she needed help, but she just stared at me with this blank expression. No response, no movement, just cold, empty eyes. I got a chill down my spine, so I decided to drive around her and get out of there. When I looked in my rearview mirror, she was gone. No trace, no sign of her anywhere. I drove straight home and tried to shake it off, but I couldn't sleep that night. I checked the local news the next day, thinking I might find some explanation, but there was nothing. No accidents, no missing persons, nothing to explain who or what I saw.
This happened to me when I was a kid. My family lived in a really old house, the kind with creaky floors and doors that never quite fit their frames. One night, I woke up to the sound of someone crying. It was soft at first, but it grew louder, almost like it was coming from inside my room. I was terrified, but I didn't want to move, so I just lay there, paralyzed. Eventually, I worked up the courage to turn on the lamp beside my bed. The crying stopped immediately. I looked around the room, nothing was out of place. I tried to tell myself it was just a bad dream, but the sound had been so real, so close. It wasn't until years later that I found out the house had a tragic history. A little girl had drowned in the well behind the house, about 50 years before we moved in. Her family had owned the house before us, and apparently, her room was the one I slept in. I still get chills thinking about it.
This one still freaks me out to this day. I used to work night shifts at a small 24-hour gas station. It was usually pretty quiet, especially after midnight, so I'd just sit behind the counter and try to stay awake. One night, around 3 a.m., a man walked in. He was tall, wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. He walked straight up to the counter, didn't say a word, just stared at me. His eyes were this piercing blue, almost glowing. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. He asked me in this low, gravelly voice, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I didn't know what to say, so I just kind of stammered out a no. He stared at me for another few seconds, then smiled, a slow, creepy smile. "You should," he said, and then he turned around and walked out. I watched him leave, but when I got up to check the parking lot, there was no car, no sign of him anywhere. It was like he vanished into thin air. I quit that job not long after.
I've never shared this before, but here goes. I was visiting my grandparents' farm when I was about 10 years old. The farm was huge, with acres of land and a dense forest on the edge of the property. One afternoon, I wandered off into the woods. I don't know how long I was walking, but I eventually realized I was lost. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything started to look the same. Just when I was starting to panic, I heard someone calling my name. It wasn't my mom or dad. This voice was different, more like a whisper, but somehow loud enough that it echoed through the trees. I followed the voice, thinking maybe it was one of my cousins playing a trick on me. But when I got to where the voice seemed to be coming from, there was no one there. Just an old abandoned cabin I had never seen before. I was about to go inside when I felt this overwhelming sense of dread. Like if I went in there, something bad would happen. So I turned around and ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Somehow, I found my way back to the farm. When I told my grandparents what happened, they got really quiet and told me never to go into those woods again. To this day, I have no idea who or what was calling my name.